That's Patricia. Hey, Patricia.
Hello.
Hello. The screen is all yours. But
Oh
before
my.
that, let me just introduce our audience to you. You are the co-author of the Nexus Framework for Scaling Scrum that was published by Pearson, a very popular book in the field of Agile and Scrum. You're a well-known public speaker and mentor. You have been co-developing the evidence-based management framework for business agility and also the Nexus framework. And you are a course developer for scrum.org. You're a product owner there. You help organizations thrive in complexity. And yeah, you have been working in companies in Europe, in the US, so a very cultural and international profile.
Oh.
And you speak 4 languages, which is also very interesting.
I do, and I'll stick to English today because I'm in Boston, Massachusetts in the US, and I am slightly caffeinated. I'm not as caffeinated as I'd like to be for you all today, but it was really nice to catch the end of that talk, Deepa. That was really wonderful. It's a lot of things that I'm thinking about. Thank you for having me. And I think we have quite a quick time box, but I'm really happy to share some of the things that I've been thinking about and the conversations that I've been having with different leaders and what I've been experiencing myself. I will give you guys the caveat that we are experiencing a big winter snow blizzard here right now. So I am praying that the electricity and everything stays, but just for you guys to know, we're about to get like 1 meter of snow. And so it's very windy and all those things, but I'm glad to be here. It's a joy to share these things and see people still loving to learn. So I'm going to put my PowerPoint on and I'll give you this caveat. So I'm here to talk about evidence-based management, and evidence-based management, really the genesis of it was everybody was running toward and pursuing this whole Agile thing, right? Let's say for 20 years, it's been Scrum, more than that. And this whole thing about we need more Scrum, we need more Agile, we need all these things. To the extent that, in my opinion, it's become a little bit of a buzzword, right? So when you play buzzword bingo, you could say Agile, Scrum, culture, all these things. And what we were really pursuing and what we were thinking about is if people are trying to be Agile, if people are working with teams and using some sort of Agile framework, how would we actually know that there was success there? How do we actually know that we're getting better? And so when we think about measurement, I ask that you keep that in your mind, that it's not I'm not necessarily looking for success metrics. What I'm looking for is I'm looking to understand that if we're working towards something, how do we understand that we're actually moving in the right direction? And it really comes from a place of curiosity, which is a lot of the psychology that I've been thinking about. So my background is in organizational behavior. I've done a lot of product management. So all these things are starting to combine and put themselves together. And the reason that I'm combining for this talk today, Scrum, measurement, and continuous improvement, is because recently I've been having a lot of conversations with C-level people who, lo and behold, they're not in software, but they're using Scrum and things like Nexus in their organizations, where I wouldn't even think that it was possible. And the thing that they've been moving along toward is the notion that we have these Scrum teams and we don't understand if their sprint goals have any contribution to the organization. So the flip side of that is I have to wonder, what are the goals and the strategies of the organization? Are they very big? Why isn't there that connection? And what do those goals look like? And so it becomes that kind of cultural conversation is, it's because the product owners and the Scrum masters, they're very junior. All the Scrum masters that are good, they're going to work for, these other fancy organizations. We have who we have. So there's this disconnection. We said, well, let's look at that, right? Let's understand what success is and make that transparent. And the last thing I'll talk about curiosity. and how evidence-based management really is this notion of curiosity is because we're using it to ask questions, which is what we do for a profession, right? And the thing about culture that has a lot of data that shows behind this in terms of curiosity is that that is not perceived to be the same in an organization. So a lot of leaders or a lot of Agilists presume that we can be curious and ask questions, but the people who are actually doing the work, myself, I found myself in this situation before, and it depends on the environment, has really been what the data shows that we don't think that we can be curious, and we don't actually ask questions. Culturally also, we might shut our mouth because we don't think, not that we're also just, it's not just about the risk of the job and the safety, it's actually because we don't think we're going to get the honest answer. So it's not worth asking. So that's something that we want to keep in mind, especially as we think about, you know, how we pose questions, what we can do to invoke conversation, but why things like evidence and data are so important for me, because then it's not just about the highest paid person in the room. So I guess I started on that conversation. Again, I'm from scrum.org. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the company. It's founded by Ken Schwaber. He's a good friend of mine, and we are focused, and we have been focused on a mission. It used to be improving professionalism, and we really do that to help people and teams solve complex problems. So we're a global community. There are some scrum.org friends on this call, and that's the community. It has been for the past 2 years, and we're still like that. So let's tie this all together for you very quickly. So this conversation that I'm having with these executives, and they say, you know, we're using Scrum, we want to do things very quickly, right? Maybe they understand this notion that Scrum is there to help reduce risk also, right? To expose a lot of things. So you might think that Scrum is a product delivery framework. And you're right, it is, but it's not just about products. The way that I think about Scrum, and a lot of the people around me, is that it's really focused in continuous improvement. It's really a continuous improvement framework, and I'm going to show you how we can think about that and use the evidence to support it. And I'm just kind of chuckling to myself because I was talking about buzzword bingo, and I probably had 13 of them at this point. So anyways, so there's 3 dimensions of how I think about Scrum, and the way that it would be something that we could use to understand and really tangibly measure continuous improvement. And that's through 3 ways. The first one is product value, team capability, and organizational performance. And I'll go through those things. So when we look at those 3 areas, right, and we're looking at product, team, and organization, we have to understand the concept of value. What does that mean? And again, what we're trying to do is measure value. A lot of you might be familiar with this graphic, but EBM essentially looks at 4 different areas. On the top, we have current value, which is where you are right now, right? Your current assessment of value. That might be your assets, that might be employee satisfaction. That is how you are managing that you are actually delivering some value to your customer now. Unrealized value is really saying, what is the potential? What is the future value? What is that gap that if we closed it, is that worth closing, right? So the satisfaction gap in unrealized value is, as a customer, I'm here and I would like to be at point B. Maybe that's because there's something new I would like to pursue, or maybe there's a quality gap there. And a company has to say, is that worth closing? And that's where I think about value. So those are things that are focused on market value. Below, what you see is ability to innovate and time to market. And those are really things about the organization's capability, right? So it's time to market is how long does it take you to release, to get some feedback. Ability to innovate is what can you do to potentially pursue new things, and we'll get into that. But really, that's the genesis of how we're going to look at EBM and think about those different things. So when we look at every sprint in Scrum, right, so 30 days or less, we think about this as an opportunity to improve product value and learn something. And the Scrum events, refinement's not an event, but it's highlighted, are there where we should be, if we're not, taking a curious stance to ask ourselves, what is it that we could do to improve value? Sprint planning is a great place where this should be happening, right? So sprint planning shouldn't feel like, hey, product owners telling us, here's 15 things that we should be working on. It really should take on that stance when we're thinking about value of, if we deliver these things, how would we know that they have value, right? When we think about the updated Scrum Guide, it's talking about the product goal. What are the things that we can do to pursue that? It's really thinking about if we were successful in addressing or trying these things, and that was stuff that we got done, what would be the feedback that we would have from customers? How would that pursue? So you're looking at those things. We're looking obviously at the sprint review, trying to get that feedback from stakeholders, not just giving a presentation of the things that we've built, but really thinking about what is that most important feedback that we would like to contribute to product value. And also during the daily Scrum, having that conversation as a team. And the area of EBM that I would match up with that, there's a little bit of unrealized value, but it would be current value, right? We're really hyper focused on product value there and what we can do to increase the satisfaction of the customers, increase maybe revenue, increase downloads. There are different things that people will be trying to target at that. And in the evidence-based management guide on scrum.org, so it's a guide, it's like the Scrum Guide, you can read it for free. There will be example measurements that you could use for your organization that might make sense for you. What I want to introduce to you or leave with you today are really techniques that you could start to think about capturing that value. So this is something that I really love, and it's a play on Jeff Gotthealth and Seiden's Lean UX book. But the way that we could start to think about PBIs that would drive that focus on value, so we would know what to measure, is really something where we say, hey, we believe doing this, the PBI for these people, this customer, will achieve this outcome. What is it that it will do to satisfy this customer, right? And we'll know that when we look at this measurement, if it changes. And that's when we can decide what the measurement is. Rather than coming with the measurement first, think about what that outcome is that we're trying to change. And that's really something that would look at current value. One of the things that I want to stress when we look at current value is that it should be outcome based. Something that we're looking because people's behaviors change, but what is it that customer, what is it that from that outside perspective that they're really trying to achieve, right? So we're thinking about that when we're going through current value. So in pursuit of value, one of the things that's really important is actually our capability to deliver on these things. So every sprint is also an opportunity to improve the Scrum team's capability to deliver value. And where this is really important, obviously, is what can we do, right? We would discuss that during sprint planning, daily Scrum. What are those impediments? How can we work together? And the sprint retrospective is, having open and honest conversations about what we can do to improve. Hopefully you have a great Scrum Master there who will help address some of those organizational issues, but making sure that it's really focused on the capability of the team and what we need to do to improve. Because sometimes what I see is from a sprint retrospective, it's kind of going through the motions, but it's also sometimes like a complaining session about things that we can't control. And so it's not effective. And so we really want to focus this on what is capable for us to improve the team's capability so that we can focus on those bottom two areas of ability to innovate and time to market. So the definitions, again, are there in the link at the bottom or on the evidence-based management guide. But this for me has some things where I would focus on saying, there's two areas that you might think about with your teams. Is ability to innovate for me really looks at something like, what is our ability to pivot? What is our time to pivot? Time to market, there's something interesting there for me about what is the overhead that we have in there that elongates our time to make a decision. So those are kind of things that I think about from there. And as Agile leaders, as people who are leading teams, as people who are in teams, there are a lot of different techniques that you can think about to address that. The thing that I want to add here, though, is that sometimes, they'll say, Patricia, do we have to only focus on outcome-based things? Can we, we have so much trouble trying to release something. Is it okay when we just focus on time to market, right? And I'll say, I think it is, because if you are working and it takes you 2 years to release, 14 months, 1 year, 6 months. What you want to do is probably be able to make sure you shorten that time of how long it takes you to get feedback, because if you do not, the opportunity to pursue value has already passed. To pursue something that's going on in the market has already passed. And the balance is that you also don't want to create the best Lamborghini only to park it in your garage, right? I do not have a Lamborghini in my garage, but you do not want to create this best engine that you could have only to do nothing with it, right? So that's the balance between money. This thing that's really interesting is that taking the time to market also is a really interesting reflection. And there's some measurements here again that you can look at. These are software driven ones, but that might be helpful for you just when you're flipping back through the presentation. But here, a lot of people do value stream mapping, and they think about flow metrics. What I encourage people to do as a team is very quickly try to understand when we get an idea or when we're pursuing something that gets on the backlog and the time that it takes to get to the customer, how could we segment so that we could see things that we do are value added, like above the line in green, and things that we do that are non-value added. And the amazing things that I've done this, when we really quickly sketched this with teams, I was doing this with some teams in Hong Kong, that would be over 2 years ago now. But what we found that was interesting is that they thought, oh, we need to do a lot of automation. We need all these new tools because, you know, it takes so long. And when we actually did this very quickly, what they found was that it was these red blocks under was always that they had to get approval from somebody. And that was what was really extending this time. So it was something that was kind of artificial that they put there because they had the way their management layer was stacked, that they always had to go and ask for approval for everything. And so management was going, why does it take you so long to do things? And now they were able to say, hey, it's because we have this inability to make decisions and our product owners aren't really empowered. What can we do to work on this, right? And that's a leadership conversation. The other thing when we think about ability to innovate that I find interesting, and this was also with the client, is when we think about innovation, there's a lot of companies that, especially now coming through COVID, who say we need to work and we should have the cash to work on new things. We need to innovate to be able to stay ahead. And that's great. It just depends which is better for you, right? You can have A, where you're focused on new capabilities and enhancements are 38%, or hey, we're not focused on new capabilities for this product. We're just focused on fixing the stuff there that we have. So 53% are going on defects. These are arbitrary. My point here is that what we've seen when we look at things like this, when you really track your innovation rate, you will get information that is interesting, because what I've seen is this is a place where there's a disconnect between people who create the budgets and the people who are actually doing the work. And what that is to say is that I've been in a room where this executive VP said, yes, Patricia, you know, we're like product A. We spend this much money, we dedicate it to this, but we're not seeing any innovation come from the teams. And when we actually calculated this, the way that the time of the teams was being spent was actually much closer to B. So there was this big disconnection where they're going, you're not innovating. But what it was that they had budgeted 50% to go to new capabilities, but because they had been skipping on quality behind previously, they were actually fixing a lot of things. So that kind of information, I think, again, is just interesting for us to be able to have those conversations as a larger team. The installed version index, and these are things that you might be familiar with if you've taken some of our product owner classes, is when we think about our ability to innovate, it's not only our own desire of where we would like to innovate, but it's also about things like this, which stop us from pivoting, which is when we are releasing things, are we tracking the way our customers are using those features or those versions or the latest release of the things that we do? And what was interesting here is this is very close to a real life example where we're working with a company, and what they saw was that customer satisfaction was going down. There was low usage in the product, or people weren't happy with the product. And so the CIO, he said, let's start to put new things out. Let's get another version out. And when we tracked it, what they saw was that a lot of the customers were on previous versions. And the way that time and money was being spent was being supporting those old versions. So we said, hey, if you just started to fix some of these things up, we wouldn't have to spend $10,000 a month just answering support calls just to manage these old versions that people were still on. So it's also that kind of information from a user behavior that you want to keep track of. And also understanding that maybe you want to be strategic about how you think about releases. So imagine at scrum.org, we have training, right? So if we were continuously updating our professional Scrum Master class, that would be something that might be hard for our trainers, the professional Scrum trainers, to absorb. And also they probably wouldn't be teaching that. They probably stick with the version behind that they were more comfortable with, right? So it's those things like that. So we've talked about product, we've talked about teams, and here we are at continuously improving the organization. So every sprint is an opportunity to advance the organization towards some greater goal. And that's where we come into unrealized value, right? I was talking about what is that opportunity that we might pursue that will bring us some sort of potential value or some sort of, closing that satisfaction gap for the customers. And those greater goals, where are they coming from? So here, what I want to leave you with here is thinking about when we're talking about those strategic goals, have a consideration if you think that that is tactical or actually strategic. And here I have some examples of goals where it's like, hey, we just want to consolidate our cloud platforms. That's not inspiring anybody. When you have OKRs that are like this, or some sort of objects or goals, take a look at those things and think about, why would we do that? Why would we be just trying to improve our NPS or improving current value? Take a think about what your competitors might be doing, right? When people are just like, we have to reduce costs, insurance companies, we just have to reduce costs. Think about why we want to do that and what we're trying to do that actually makes a difference, because that is how you will start to get into a more outcome-based mindset, and also something that is more inspiring for the teams. So to find your strategic goals, keep asking why, right? Just be like a child and say, why? Maybe don't do that straight to your manager, but think about it and align your sprint goals with the greater goals, right? So that is when I had that conversation with the executive, is saying, you have those goals that you think about first from a strategic point. How are those actually related to the sprint goals? Are the teams aware of it? How would you align that, right? So your product and product backlogs with your greater goals. If those things happen, what I assert is that you will see some change in the teams. I've seen it before. If you guys are familiar with Gary Hamel's pyramid of human capabilities, where we want to stand is when you start to encourage that self-management, encourage that bottom-up intelligence, encourage that curiosity. When you give people that goal and the outcome of what they're trying to pursue, where you will engage them is at the top of the pyramid: passion and zeal, creativity, initiative. And there's explanations of these three personalities, because we can engage people who are, I'm going to be obedient, I'm going to show up for work and be very focused, I'm really, really smart. But when we're trying to spread that wealth of knowledge, the top of the triangle, those three aspects are really where you start to have some very interesting things happen that make it a pleasure to come to work. So evidence-based management is not just those 4 key value areas, because it wouldn't be agile if we weren't actually trying to learn and iterate, which is what enables curiosity. So think about these 3 things that make up EBM. It's the goals that you're reaching towards, the evidence that you're moving in the right direction, even the strategic goal, is that the correct direction, and using empiricism to support that. So the inspection and adaptation for me is fundamental in all the things that we do that encourages curiosity. My last thought around this is really when you explore those four key value areas, if you were to sit down with your teams and ask them, what are the things that we measure today, and have them measure it and put it on these four circles, it would be really interesting to see where people are focused. Previously, I would say pre-COVID, I would say everybody was focused on time to market. Largely from when I was doing workshops and working with customers. I'm seeing this interesting trend where a lot of people are focused on unrealized value, all those new and shiny things that are probably not thinking about, is it worth it to close it? But they're doing it to the extent where I've seen some risks that they're not paying attention to their current value, meaning maybe their cash cow product, they're not thinking about their employees, right? There are a lot of people can leave jobs now. And they're also cutting corners that it's going to hurt their ability to innovate, is what I think, because of quality issues, because they're trying to go so fast to pursue new things. So Scrum can help you continuously improve your product, value, team capability, organizational performance. Think about this in terms of ambitious and audacious goals, not just the tactical ones, right? How do we make those transparent? Transparent means understood so that we can align together. And think about how you can keep raising the bar and question those goals. And if you don't even have access sometimes to those things, when you're just focused on your capability, that's okay, right? That might be where you live, but just make sure that you're aware of how that contributes back to the value, because at some point, it's diminishing returns. And I submit that you may notice the engagement as you start to focus in a more outcome way. I recently just told a developer, I'd like you to be on my team, but I am not looking for a feature factory. I'd like to engage you for your brain, right? That engagement is changing, and that notion of accountability changes what happens. So that is a very, very quick talk on EBM. I broke that down with the Scrum framework. There is a guide. There's certainly on our website different case studies and videos. There's a one-day workshop class that people can start to think about these and create some sort of canvas. There's a certification assessment that you can try. I only stuck one blog in here. It's written by yours truly, because I point to a lot of different areas that myself and my colleague Kurt Bittner think about in terms of, what does this mean for goal formation? What does this mean for OKRs? How are all these things there? That one blog will point you to the different directions and how I categorize them in terms of making measurement meaningful. So I hope I didn't blow the time box completely, but feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can say, hey, we were on this talk, and ask me any questions there.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Your theme is something that is very close to a lot of people's hearts, because we do see organizations that tend to go into different strategies, but there's not any data that can back those strategies up. You don't really see the effects of the strategies in a tangible way, in an evidence-based way. So this is something I think a lot of us are gonna look into and also, study more. Due to our time limitation, we have only room for one question right now.
All right,
So,
let me just get this.
Who would like to be that one person who gets to ask question?
I don't know. I may have spoken so fast that there's no questions. But if people do have questions, if they do come and they start to notice this behavior in their organizations, you are, again, more than welcome to ask me in LinkedIn. And I'll remember that we were on this Agile Leadership Day India conference.
Thank you, Patricia. That's very kind. That's a very kind offer, actually. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm not seeing any questions. So yeah, that was it. Once again, thank you so much for giving us this talk, Patricia.
You're welcome.
And we're about to wrap up the whole day.